Okay, so let's look at finding x and y intercepts by hand. So to find the x-intercepts, you basically need to substitute y equals 0. We call it f of x equals 0, and then we're going to solve. And then to get the y-intercepts by hand, you need to plug in x equals 0. So let's start with this first one. If we want to find the x-intercepts, we basically need to say y equals 0 and solve it just like you would a regular equation. So for this one, I'm going to use factoring. So I need to multiply the 2 times the negative 3, and that gives me negative 6. And then I need to add to get the number in the middle, which is a negative 1. So I need to multiply negative 3 times 2, because if I add negative 3 and 2, they would also give me negative 1. So those are the right numbers. And then we can use grouping. So write down your first term, then write these numbers in place of the negative 1. We're going to put negative 3x plus 2x, and then bring down the last term. So like that one stayed the same, and that one stayed the same, and the middle is now written as 2 terms instead of 1, and that way you can use grouping. So then you group the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. And you want to take out the greatest common factor from each group. So let's take out x, and we would have 2x minus 3 left over. Then we can't take anything out here, so we just put a 1 out front, which is still very important. And then what you take out, so x plus 1 will go together, and what is matching becomes your other factor. Now keep in mind this is all still equal to 0, so now to finish getting our x-intercepts, we set each part of that equal to 0 and finish solving for those. So we would say if we subtract 1, x equals negative 1. If we add 3 and divide by 2, x will equal 3 halves. Now for your y-intercept, because those are your x-intercepts, you just need to plug in that x equals 0. So to show your work, you need to write this step. So 2 times 0 squared, so I'm just substituting it right there and right there. Minus 0 minus 3 would just give me, and we could keep f of x or y equals, let's put y equals. So y would just equal negative 3. So that is my y-intercept. It is not enough work to just point at the negative 3. This is the way to show your work. Now let's look at the second one. We have x cubed minus 16x. So this one has a greatest common factor. They both have x. So let's take it out and see what's left. If we take x out, we end up with x squared minus 16. And we're setting it equal to 0, and we're working on solving. So we want to keep breaking this down if we can. So let's break it down into x plus 4, x minus 4. Still equal to 0. And now we have 3 factors. So we need to say that x equals 0 is one of our factors. X plus 4 equals 0 is another factor. And x minus 4 is our third factor. So that one needs to also equal 0. So then you already have one answer right there. We need to subtract 4. So we get x equals negative 4. Then we need to add 4, so x equals positive 4. So we have 3 x-intercepts, and then the y-intercept is just to plug in x equals 0. So we're going to plug in 0 cubed minus 16 times 0, and then that is just equal to 0 for our y-intercept. Okay, so we have 2 more. So we're going to continue the same idea. So notice I'm solving for the x-intercepts by factoring. The y-intercepts, I'm plugging in x equals 0 to show my work. So let's start with x-intercepts for this one and put y equals 0 and just rewrite the problem. And then we're going to break it into some factors. And in this case, it's kind of like 1 is right there. So 1 times 16 equals 16. And then you can add to get the middle number, which is negative 10. So the numbers that will help us do both would be negative 8 and negative 2. But then we only have a 1 in front of our x squared, so this one is the easier type of factoring. It's a trinomial that just doesn't take as much work as that first one did. So once we get our factors, we can set them both equal to 0. So x minus 8 equals 0, and x minus 2 equals 0. So we get x equals 8 and x equals 2. For our y-intercept, we just need to plug in x equals 0 to show our work. So we have 0 squared minus 10 times 0 plus 16, which will simplify to just be 16. But again, it's important to show your work. So you do need to show that you plug in the 0 for the x. And then for h of x, let me grab a different color. We're going to do 3x squared minus 15x. So this one has a greatest common factor of 3x. So if we take that out, we have x minus 5 left over. And then we could set each one of those factors equal to 0. So 3x equals 0 and x minus 5 equals 0. And if we just divide by 3, we still get x equals 0. And then if we add 5, we get x equals 5. So we have two x-intercepts. Those are both x-intercepts. The y-intercept would just be to plug in 0. So h of x is 3 times 0 squared minus 15 times 0. So it's like saying y would equal, and then that would just turn out as 0. So your y-intercept is just 0 for that one again. Okay, so that's it for that part.